Hi and welcome. My name is Adam Lefever Hughes. I'm the education coordinator for the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians. And I'm here with Zeb Highben. And we're here to talk a little bit about one of our Raabe Prize winners. We're doing a series of videos talking about the prize winners for the Raabe Prize for Excellence in Sacred Composition. And today, I asked Zeb if we could talk a little bit about David Ashley White's composition that he won, and for which he won the 2015 prize, and his piece "Spirit Moving Over Chaos." So, thanks, Zeb, for being here. Yeah, just thank you so much. I wonder if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of background on why I'm talking to you about this.
Yeah, I think it's because scheduling is a tricky business for all of us these days, and so I think, had a couple of different attempts to get together with David Ashley White to talk about his piece, and either you haven't been available, or I haven't been available, or he hasn't been available. So as not to slow down the overall project of recording these interviews. You and I are having this conversation since I chaired the committee, and feel really strongly about this. This is a fantastic piece of music.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, and hopefully, in sometime in the future, I will be able to get a chance to speak with David. But thanks in the meantime. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, as you just said, you were the chair of the selection committee in 2015 when this David's piece was awarded the prize. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the process of choosing these winning pieces. And we haven't really talked about that yet in these videos. And, what's the makeup of the committee, and, what's involved in the process, and kind of what is the committee really tasked with in this process?
Sure. I think the makeup of the committee changes often from year to year. In the years that I was chairing it, um, I would invite people to participate as adjudicators, and sometimes I'd go back to the same people because they knew the process. Other times I would invite new folks. Always tried to make sure we had some gender parity across the committee, and we would usually try to get some what, for a lack of a better term, maybe I'll call academic church musicians, people working in colleges and universities and church music programs, but also make sure we had people who were working in parish positions, because one of the goals of the prize is to increase the repertoire and to honor repertoire that grows out of Lutheran congregational song and our belief about the importance of assembly song. So that was always a very important piece. The way we typically ran the committees during my tenure was we would get all of the scores, all of the entrants in a particular year's contest. Those were usually prepped by someone in the ALCM office. They're blind scores, no references to the composer on the score or the recording, if they sent a recording, or any of the other materials, so that we were just judging the music and not, having our opinions swayed or changed if we happened to know who the composer was.
Right. I'm wondering if you remember do you remember how many pieces there were in 2015?
Yeah, in 2015 we had 63 total entries,
Okay.
and composers can submit their own works. I suppose someone could submit another composer's work. I don't know if that happens, but that's, I suppose, a possibility. And publishers can submit pieces as well from their catalog that fit the paradigms of the prize and that they think would be worthy. So in 2015 we had 63 entries, and I'm not remembering that fact. I have my notes from
Yeah,
when
I
we
was going to
did
say that's a good memory, Zeb. Very
yes
good.
from when we did the search, did the adjudicating. And the other members of our committee were Valerie Lefever Hughes, Rebecca Schultz, Dan Schwant, and Paul Westermeyer. And our approach was for everyone to take several weeks to evaluate the materials on their own and to come up with a list, sort of a ranking. And then we compared rankings, and over a series of a few months, we would take our comparison and our rankings until we had narrowed down to what we believed sort of the short list should be, and then eventually the winner, and any honorable mentions if we felt there should be honorable mentions.
Thanks for a little bit of a window into that process. I know, I've participated on that committee before I worked for ALCM, and yeah, it really is kind of a rigorous and thoughtful process, right? There's a lot of thought that goes into it.
Yeah, and what I have enjoyed about it is, you get to see so much creative activity. The focus, because it's a competition, is on the winning piece, but the vast number of pieces represent just sort of a groundswell of compositional activity happening all over the country. And it's a trope we frequently hear, that church music is dead or church music is dying or nobody cares, those sorts of things. And without minimizing, I think, the struggles church musicians have, which are real and tangible, there are so many people doing really good work and really creative work all over the U.S. and Canada, and presumably the rest of the world as well. That was one of the things that was really heartening about seeing all of these entries um, in 2015 and in other years that we would get for the prize. You really get a sense of, even when some of the pieces are still a bit raw, still gesticulating. Maybe the composer doesn't have the chops that they will one day develop. You get a glimpse of the fact that people care about this, and they're doing good work, and they're trying to strengthen and grow and improve the church's song, which is, of course, the goal of the prize.
Absolutely. Part of this choosing the prize, is thinking about how do the particular pieces fit the spirit of the prize as it's described. And so, just to kind of give a little bit of background there, I'm going to read a little bit about this prize and its goals. Bill and Nancy Raabe endowed this prize to encourage significant work in composition. And just going to read a little bit here. While any sacred piece may be submitted, preference is given to those compositions which grow out of, but are not necessarily restricted to, the worshiping assembly of the baptized who gather around word and sacrament. Works that include the voice or voices are preferred over those for instruments alone. And then, sort of one other little piece here that I think is reflected in a lot of our prize winners, that the piece, it must be written in the last 5 years from when it was submitted, and that it reflects a larger history of excellence on the part of the composer. And so, with that sort of framework, how does David Ashley White's piece, Spirit Moving Over Chaos, how does it fit that? What were some of the conversations around the piece?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, well, if people watching the video are familiar with the piece and the score, or have used it before, it on first blush appears deceptively simple. It's just a unison choral work,
Mm.
um, chant based, kind of mystical. There are parts for oboe or C instrument, handbells. There can be keyboard or percussive support. It's kind of about creating this sense of mystery and awe, um, and maybe the sense that you don't know quite what's going on in terms of kind of tonic dominant relationships and things like that. Um, so if we think about the origins of assembly song in monophonic unison singing, there's immediately a connection. There's immediately connection there. But there's also obviously a bit of a historical connection in the idea of chant, and the chant of the church, the song of the church, in Latin, pre-Reformation, as kind of a connection here too. And this is achievable, right? You could do this in a variety of parish contexts, not only because of the instrumental flexibility, but because of the fact that that's largely unison. Uh, Even if you don't have the forces of a big steeple church choir at your disposal, yet it's not simplistic. There's a lot of complexity in here, a lot of interesting intervals. It's a poem by Patricia B. Clark, so it's kind of a contemporary, written in the late '90s, I think. So it's kind of a contemporary text around the work of the Spirit, kind of Pentecost themes. One member of the committee said, and I'm going to quote from my report to the LCM board, one committee member said, this piece, quote, with its aleatory Lydian slash Mixolydian hexatonic character, engages the music of our time, and its text fits the poetry of our time too. So while it harkens back to, the church's roots in unison singing and in chant, it felt very kind of contemporary and of the moment and the spirit of the age.
Yeah. Yeah, and you hit on something that I'm remembering from another video that I recorded with Lorraine Brew, actually, now of blessed memory. And she and I were speaking about Richard Prue's piece, and I'm temporarily forgetting the title, but she used some of the same words of it is simple, really, in its construction, but not simplistic. There's uh, s- so much that is said with such simple, what seems like simple notes and rhythms and words. And I think, as were talking, I was thinking about that connection, right? That connection from the past to the present and really leaning into the future of that I think, try to make sure that we're holding on to all ends of that time. And yeah, it really comes out in this piece. I'm particularly struck by just the variety of it, right? The not the variety, the flexibility. That's a better.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it doesn't take a 30 voice choir necessarily or a room full of degreed people to do it, that there's so much possibility in it.
Yeah, and it's also one of the things the committee liked about it at the time was that it adds to the repertoire for Pentecost, for the
Mm.
Feast of Pentecost, which is a time when, given where it falls in the church calendar, even the big churches, even the big choirs, sometimes aren't in session at that point in the calendar year, right? If it falls in June or something, late May, and or you have reduced forces. I remember when we lived and worked in Minnesota. Um, Hunting opener and fishing opener meant that the tenor and bass sections tended to be depleted at the church.
That happens here in Pennsylvania too.
Yeah, yeah. So the ability to have something that's really musically interesting and well crafted and creates um, that sense of awe and sort of wonder and mysticism, that is so appropriate for Pentecost, but have it be something that can be performed by forces that aren't humongous, is really useful across the church, especially for that festival day. And there's not as much repertoire, I think, for Pentecost as there is for certainly Christmas, Advent, Easter, Lent. So it was a nice addition, sort of, to the repertoire writ large, for that important festival.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm wondering if we could spend just a little bit of time talking about some of the specifics within the piece that create some of that mysticism. We've talked about it being there, but I wonder if some of those things we could kind of lift up a little bit. You had that great quote from a committee member, but um, what are some things in this piece? Maybe. Uh, I don't really know how to say it melodically and all these little details that help to create this mystery.
Yeah. Well, it might be worth, if as people watch the video, if they look at the score, if they have it to hand, and kind of scroll through. We think of 99.9% of our anthems are notated in a particularly standard kind of traditional way that we're used to. But of course, especially in the last half of the 20th century, alternate forms of notation, particularly for works like this one that are about creating an atmosphere or a mood, would change the way they were notated. The great Canadian composer, I think he was Canadian, Armory Schaeffer comes to mind. Epitaph for Moonlight and pieces like this that used a graphical style of notation. David doesn't use graphical notation here, but as you look through the score, what you'll see is staves, a single stave of music with maybe 5 to 12 measures in it, followed by some instructions.
Mm-hmm.
And then another stave, 8, 10, 12 measures, unison, followed by more instructions. And he breaks the piece down into sections: introduction, transition one, section one, transition two, etc. All of the instructions, this isn't one of those pieces that you as the conductor can kind of say, oh, I'm going to program that for Pentecost, and then not bother to look at the score until the first rehearsal. You have got to have read through it in advance, thought about what it means and how it's structured, and how you're going to approach explaining that to the choir, because that's really the trickiest part, is making the choir understand how to realize something that looks different on the page maybe than what they're used to. But the scale he uses, which you can see on the last page of the score, these are the pitches he gives for the pitched percussion that you may or may not choose to use in your performance of this. But it's also the scale on which the pattern on which the melody of the piece is based, is an unusual scale. As the committee pointed out, it's kind of Lydian, kind of Mixolydian. D to E, E to F sharp to G sharp to A to C natural, and then C natural to D. Yeah. So that unusual pattern of whole steps and half steps, unusual to our ears, creates that sense of mystery and atmosphere. You don't know necessarily where home is. You don't know where tonic is. You don't hear a 5/7 chord pulling you toward, the home base, the home key. Yeah. And then throughout, the pitched percussion, the keyboard, the oboe, create this sense of, and staggered aleatoric entrances for these different pieces create a sense of add to that sense of mystery. There's a canon in section 3 that can be a 2-part canon, a 3-part canon. Dynamics are flexible. He gives instructions that, where there are loud sections, you can fade away. There's just great flexibility here, and no two performances are going to be exactly the same. Right. That is hopefully true for most pieces of music if we're being sensitive to things like forces and acoustic and the energy in the room and that sort of thing. But it's quite obviously true here, because even if you tried to do it exactly the same way twice, I don't know that you'd be able to.
Yeah. Speaking of that last page, I think there's so much I think about this piece that he explains himself. It is in the spirit of improvisation that this publication was prepared. What is contained on these pages does not necessarily have to be followed literally. I mean, I think so often we think of composers as setting down exactly what it is that they're wanting to communicate or what they want to hear. And I think, as you said, that flexibility really comes through. I mean, he even gives many suggestions of ways that you could tailor this piece to whatever forces you have. And
that's another piece that I think I remember the committee discussing, is that is also historic, and that is also Lutheran. So yeah. One of the criterion of the prize that is not for the adjudication committee to decide, because the adjudication committee is looking at redacted scores that don't have the composer's name, is that that heritage, that experience piece, the quality of the composer's past work. By the time the works get to the committee, that kind of vetting step has already happened. But with something like this, that flexibility, all the different suggestions, instead of oboe, I mean, most scores will say, oboe or C instrument, or they'll say violin or C instrument. He spells out the particular instruments he think would be best if you don't have an oboe.
Yeah.
And if you don't have organ or piano, synthesizer is just as good, if not better.
Right.
He gives a
Yeah.
list of the pitched percussion you might incorporate. You could use harp. Anything that adds color, he says, is fine. All of that harkens back to syntagma musicum and Pretorius and Bach, and the idea that you use what's to hand,
Yeah.
um, and what's to hand won't necessarily be the same from week to week and year to year. So that was another, you know, creative element, particularly in our world, where, as you said, we're used to seeing a score where the composer tells you everything to do, every jot and tittle is presented to you. And here we have something that codifies the kind of flexibility that in the 16th, 17th, 18th did not need to be written down because cantors would just use whatever was to hand. Don't have a tenor, replace him with a crumhorn.
Yeah.
Uh, some of us tenors sound like crumhorns
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. So some of us sound like crummy horns anyway. No, yeah, but I think, that's a really good point, and I think really speaks to probably not a large part, but a really important thing that it says that ALCM lifted up this piece with this prize to say, use what you have, and what you have are people who care about their worship life. And um, if you have to adapt a piece of music, feel free to do it. And I think that, we get ourselves wrapped up in this idea that, oh, well, we must remain true to the score. We have or text editions of everything now, it seems, and academic arguments about, well, what did Bach really mean when, and of course we can never really know, but I think that the message is received loud and clear in this piece that we are a group of people worshiping together, and we bring what we have to bear, and to bear witness to that love of Christ. And I'm just so glad that first of all that David wrote this, but also that it came to us. I'm not exactly sure of how it was submitted, but I'm just so glad that we have this piece to lift up in front of others.
Yeah, and that comment just prompts me to share one more thing, which is that you know when you look at any individual piece that has won the Raabe Prize and you talk about its own merits, that is sort of one kind of conversation. It's the conversations that you've been having with composers and other folks as we talked about the winning repertoire. But if you look over the scope of the Raabe Prize, if you went to ALCM's website and you look back to the first Raabe Prize winning piece, which I believe was Bob Farley's setting of the Solemn Reproaches in kind of a jazz idiom.
Yeah.
And then you look all the way through to the most recent winners. You see this span of things that are very elaborate and complicated and dense with many parts, vocal and otherwise. You see things that are festive for brass and organ. You see things that are very long, large works like Dan Forrest's great In Paradisum, and you see things that are shorter, anthem length, settings of the liturgy, hymn concertati, that sort of thing. What this piece does in that whole kind of pantheon of winning pieces is point to a particular kind of creativity and elegant, what do I want to say? Simple complexity, complex simplicity. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not just a wonderful piece on its own merits, but it's lovely in that it represents a kind of composition and music making within the larger group of Raabe Prize winners.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah, in a way, part of a whole.
Yeah, yeah,
And that whole, of course, probably extends even beyond the prize winners.
Yes.
as we started out by saying that, it's we are so lucky to be able to encourage so many people, and that this work is still important. And so, yeah. Well, Zeb, thanks so much for talking with me today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been great. Um, Best wishes. I know that you have a busy semester ahead, and I'll let you go with that. So thanks, and have a
Thanks,
great.
Adam.
Yep. Bye
You
bye.
too. Well.